Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Praise Daily. All week long, we are spending time in Jonah chapter 2. And so today in this video, I thought it'd be fun to recap some of the key points of Jonah's prayer that we can be thinking and praying about together as families this week. So if you haven't read Jonah chapter 2 yet, why don't you pause this video, go ahead and read that chapter as a family, and then jump back in. Here are a few of those things that I think really stand out in Jonah's prayer. Number one, we see 7 or so verses in chapter 2 where Jonah is remembering how far gone he was when God saved him. He remembers that, God, I was here and you brought me here. He's recalling in his mind the saving power of God. He's remembering how far off he was, and he's remembering how God brought him close. Next, we see in verse 4, Jonah recognizes that God is working in the whole situation. God was working in him being thrown into the water. He was working in him being swallowed by a fish. You see, these things would have seemed like maybe God was using them to destroy Jonah. But as he looks back on his life, he notices that God was actually in all of those situations, not as a way to destroy, but as a way to save. Jonah goes on in verse 6 to recognize the supreme power of God over death, over the elements, over his life. He remembers that God is ultimately in control of it all. In verse 8, he declares that God is the only God worthy of praise. And then in verse 9, Jonah responds with worship, with songs of praise, with vows to do the things that God had originally asked him to do. And finally, in verse 9, he ends with a statement that sums up the whole chapter. He says, "For my salvation is in the Lord alone." My salvation comes from God alone. So I think there are a few things we can take from this as a discussion, as a time of prayer with our families. Number one, I think we should go around and remember those times when we were far off and God chose to save us. Maybe as the parent, you can remind your children of a time in your life when you felt far from God, but then God brought you close. Next, we recognize that God is working in our lives. So maybe we have a moment where we share those times that it was hard to see God working in it all, but now as we look back on our life, we see all of these moments that might have felt like negatives at the time, but in it all, God was working to bring us closer to Him. May we recognize as we do this that God has power over life, death, and nature, and that He is the only God worthy of our praise as a family. So maybe take a moment to talk about what that's going to mean for your family moving forward. Finally, in verse 9, he responds with worship and with songs of praise. May we be families that respond to the Lord with times of worship and prayer together as we remember all of these characteristics of God, all of these things about this amazing God that we serve. And may it be known by everyone in our families that our salvation, it comes from the Lord alone. And that fact should bring us joy and freedom and hope and security in Him. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us for another Praise Daily. We'll see you soon.